Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar on public offerings. I'm Alma Pinkham and will facilitate the program today. The webinar will provide information regarding the registration of prospectuses as per Section 95(1) of the Companies Act of 71 of 2008, as amended, and about the supporting documents as well. Please note there will be a recording of the webinar which will remain on YouTube and Facebook. If you want to view it again at a later stage, you can still do so by using the link that was provided in the invite. During the webinar, you are welcome to post some comments with your questions. We will respond to questions after the presentation. The program for today, as we go to the next slide, there will first be an introduction to CIPC by myself, after which I will hand over to Samkelo Mzeleni, who is an investigator in the Corporate Disclosure and Compliance Regulation Unit of CIPC. He will do the presentation, after which we will have a question and answer session. If we can move to the next slide, CIPC is an institution of the state operating within the public administration, but outside of a public service. It was established in terms of Section 185 of the Companies Act, number 71 of 2008, as amended. If we move to the next slide, CIPC's objectives are the registration of companies, cooperatives, and intellectual property rights, and the maintenance thereof. Further, we do disclosure of information on our registers. We do enforcement of relevant legislation. We promote education and awareness of the companies and intellectual property law. Further, we do licensing of business rescue practitioners, monitoring compliance with and contravention of financial reporting standards, and making recommendations thereto. Lastly, we research and advise the Minister on matters of national policy relating to company and intellectual property law. Then I'm going to hand over to Samkelo. Thank you.
Good morning, listeners. My name is Samkelo Mzeleni. I am a senior investigator in a division called Corporate Compliance and Disclosure Regulation. We normally call the division by its acronym CCTR. I will be taking you through this presentation on public offerings of company securities, in which you can simply say prospectus registration or registration of prospectus. The division that I've mentioned, Corporate Compliance and Disclosure Regulation, CCTR, is a unit within CIPC that falls under enforcement. It is divided into 4 streams. Prospectus, which is the main focus of the day. We also deal with independent reviews. Those are complaints from independent reviewers. The most common form of complaint is when companies trade under insolvent circumstances. We have reportable irregularities as part of the stream. When those are complaints that we receive from IRBA, which is an independent regulatory board for auditors, but they normally get the complaints from the auditors themselves, in which is a form of common complaint that they normally submit to us is when the annual financial statement has not been submitted, or when the annual financial statement is submitted after the 6 months as prescribed in the Act. We also deal with the annual financial statements submitted through XBRL. CIPC's responsibility is to make sure that the financial statements meet the required standards as set out in the Companies Act. In addition to specific enforcement function as stipulated in the Act, we also empowered in terms of Section 187 2B to monitor proper compliance of the Act. You remember that CIPC is a regulator. We regulate and monitor the corporate world. As I move to the next slide, CCTR conducts proactive monitoring. Not all investigation that is done by CIPC CCTR division, we have had to receive a complaint. In most cases, we do get articles on newspapers or pick up something that is in contravention of Companies Act on social media. We do normally make an investigation. That is so-called proactive monitoring. CCRD deals with registration of prospectus, as I've already mentioned, that the prospectus registration falls within CCTR. Point number 3, prospectus registration or public offering of the company's securities is dealt under Chapter 4 of the Companies Act 71 of 2008 as amended. This is just for you for further reading. As I move to this next slide, prospectus, in brackets, a kind of information broker, electronic, relative to both listed and unlisted companies. Well, a prospectus is a form of a document, as I indicated, electronic. Mostly it will contain the corporate information of the company, the opening and closing of the offer, directors' information, shares to be offered, basically all the information that you want as a potential investor, you'll find on the prospectus. Point number 2, CCTR is tasked with vetting and registration of prospectus. Vetting means CCTR conduct extensive examination and scrutinization of information. Then, if all what has been submitted to CIPC meet the requirements, we register the prospectus. CCTR must ensure compliance in terms of proper disclosure of information so as to make sure that potential investors make informed decisions. This is what is contained in the vetting or scrutinization of information, as I've outlined. As I move to the next slide, a checklist on our administrative requirement is available on our website, and you are also required to also look into the regulations. Regulations are part of the Companies Act. They are at the back of the Companies Act booklet, those who have CIPC Companies Act. The most important regulations will be from section 45 to section 80. That will also where you will also get forms COR 464 for registration of a prospectus, COR 46.5 registration certificate when prospectus is approved. There are other forms that are also relevant, but I can't go through all of them. The most important chapters in the Act are Chapter 4, which deal with provisions of the Act, Chapter 5, application and depreciation of the chapter, Section 95, Section 96, offers that are not offers to the public, Section 99, general restrictions on offers to the public. As I move to the next slide, Section 100 requirements concerning prospectuses. CIPC procedure investing prospectuses. This is a first requirement for a prospectus. All prospectus that has been submitted to CIPC. Draft prospectus is received and vetted at 2000. We first received the prospectus in the form of a draft, which we vetted. I've already indicated what vetting means. We scrutinize information. Normally, I will perhaps in one way or the other, I can even say we received the prospectus in the form of a skeleton. We do the vetting at 2000. We identify its consent. Once we have scrutinized all the information, we normally identify comments. For instance, we find that there is no opening or closing date of an offer. and all other information that has been identified by the team as a whole, the vetting team. Then those comments will be sent to the applicant. The applicant will respond with the final prospectus. The last point says final is the response and examined, and if all is well and accepted, it is registered at 5,000. So that skeleton that I talked about now, we have had put meat in it, and then it becomes a final product. When all the requirements have been met, all the comments that were sent have been addressed, we will register a prospectus at 5,000. In all, the prospectus process cost 7,000. As I move to the next slide, both soft and hard copies of signed and dated prospectus, must be signed and dated in the prospectus. This is just for our records. We normally require that all prospectus that submit must have original signatures when necessary. The form to complete when you apply for a prospectus, as I said, we first receive the draft, and then after that we receive the final. We'll have to have a covering form, which is COR 46.4, which is a final submission for a prospectus. Point number 3, certified copies of directors and of the applicant. As I've indicated, all directors must sign the prospectus, and also the applicant. An applicant normally is not always the director. It can be a company secretary or attorneys representative of the company. As I move to the next slide, which is registration of the final prospectus, soft and hard copies of signed and dated and must be signed and dated. That I've already covered. Disclosing risk in tabular format. We need risk to be disclosed in the prospectus. You remember that we are sitting with COVID-19, which is a risk that we never anticipated. So risk is very important. Original underwriting affidavit, where necessary. We normally require that if ever, I can say it's applicable if there is a shortfall on the expected capital to be raised. We also require original letters of consent. Those are letters from the banks, auditors, attorneys, and all other organizations involved in the prospectus. Director's power of attorney, we normally require where there is a representation by a third party. Material contracts, we also require you to forward us with material contract where necessary. Not all the time. If there are contracts the company is involved in, then you can submit those contracts. COR 46.4, I've already covered that. It's always accompanying the final prospectus as a covering form. Certified copies of directors and applicant, I've already touched that. All special resolutions that are registered must also be submitted must also form part of the prospectus. If, for instance, there was a change of directors and so on, all those kind of documents must form part of the prospectus. As I move to the next slide, at the close of the offer, which is post-registration, declare number of rent and rent value of shares issued. Out of the shares that were on offer, we normally require that the company must provide how many shares were sold, what amount was raised through selling those shares. Provide a copy of the circulated prospectus. We still require the copy of the prospectus to make sure that you stick to what you have advertised. As I move to the next slide, we normally require a reporting after 6 months after the close of the offer. Declaration that terms and conditions of the prospectus are complied with. We still want you to show us that what you have put on the prospectus, you still comply with, although it might have been after 6 months after registration. Reporting requirements, as I move to the next slide, reporting requirements after 12 months. We require the companies to provide audited financial statements through XBRL platform. Declaration that the terms and conditions of the prospectus are complied with. Again, we still require you to submit a declaration to CIPC to say we are still sticking to the terms of prospectus. As I move to the next slide, expected timelines. Received before Wednesday, close of business to be processed on the Friday of the same week. This means that we must get the prospectus by Wednesday so that it can be scheduled for sitting on the same week, Friday of the same week. Request acknowledgement of receipt is not received within 24 hours. We normally receive prospectus in the form of emails. We also have a trademark drop box outside CIPC building where hard copies can be dropped. The dedicated email address for this prospectus is prospectuses@cipc.co.za. As I've indicated, those who submitted in hard copies, there is a drop box outside. We know at this point we are still using trademarks drop box. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Samkelo. We're going to the question. Sorry, we seem to have had a bit of a technical problem here, but we're going to get back to questions and answers. We are only going to stick to questions that are related to today's topic. In case you have a different question, I want to ask that you log an inquiry on our website and then that you provide your reference number if there's one, and details of inquiry. You will see there are different categories. You choose the unit it must go to and the subcategory depending on what kind of work it relates to, and the unit will get back to you. Otherwise, you can also, in the messenger service of Facebook, give details and you will be answered. Then getting to our questions, let's see if there are some regarding the topic. I see there's one that says, is a mutual bank that collects money from the public to the shareholders obliged to issue and register a prospectus prior to collecting the money from the public? Samkelo or Gideon, I've got another colleague here. Let's see, Gideon, can you answer that one for us?
Good day, I'm Gideon Schutte. Yes, they are supposed to. However, you must look at section 99, prohibits the raising of capital through a mutual bank due to the fact that they're not a public company. Only public companies can raise capital via public offerings. Thank you.
Then our next question. I don't see any other questions here. So I don't know, Samkelo, is there anything else you want to share with our viewers?
No, I think I've covered all what is necessary for the registration of the prospectus.
Okay. Okay, it seems we've had a very short webinar today and not many questions, only one. With that, I am going to close the webinar. If you have queries, as I said, please log an inquiry. You can also log inquiries regarding public offerings with this unit of Samkelo's. If they appear on our inquiry system on the website, and then they will respond to you directly. Or, as I said, if you want to log an inquiry otherwise on the messenger service of Facebook, that is also in order. Then let us just see, please also allow us on our social media platform, including Telegram. You're very welcome to join us because also on Facebook, for instance, and Twitter, you will get notices of other webinars that we will be having. So please follow us. We will be grateful for that. And also, if you have any subjects you would like us to have webinars on, you are welcome to send the email to education@cipc.co.za. Then I do see one more question here, if I can just read that. That says, what happens if a company does not issue the prospectus, but take the money from the public? Samkelo?
In those situations, CIPC normally conducts an investigation. Once the investigation has been completed, we can issue a compliance notice. The compliance notice will in one, among other things that will actually refer to the client to do, is to return all the monies that have been invested, because they are in contravention of the Companies Act.
It is also a criminal offense if you look at section 214, not to register a prospectus and issuing shares.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that seems to be our last question. With that, I will then be closing the webinar, and I thank you for joining us today. It was very short. We anticipated many more questions, but as is in order like this, we'll see you next time then again. We hope you'll join us for another webinar. Have a great day. Goodbye.